Blue skies, nothing like it. Driving out here, I had that endless view of the blue sky, the horizon that went on forever, and it's just magnificent. One of the things that I love about the Southwest. But when it comes to photography, sometimes that blue sky just gets a little bit monotonous. It doesn't have quite enough energy in it. We want some thunderhead clouds, some lightning, maybe a big storm blowing in. We want to see things that give us some energy in our image. And with this, we just don't have it. So what do? Today, what we're going to do is we're going to take our blue tones, convert them to black in Photoshop, and try to create something that's a little bit surreal looking. But in order to do that, the first thing we have to do is get it right in camera. So we're going to set up, take some images, and then we'll run into the shop and see if we can't convert those. Let's do it. Back in the day when I was a newspaper reporter, my editors used to always ask me, what's your angle? How are you going to approach this story? And that's what we have to do with our photography. There's a county road here. Farmers and ranchers drive by every day and they see this shack. They see this torn down barn, and that's their vision every single day. How are we going to take this same structure and make it different? Make it so that when they see this photograph, they go, wow, I drive by this barn every day, but I never saw it like that. And in order to do that, we've got to get our picture right. We've talked about, we're going to change these blue tones, these blue hues to black, and that's going to give us a surreal effect. But in order for the picture to work, it has to have an angle that is compelling, that draws people in and gives people a reason to want to look at it. So I'm looking here and we've got this little line of rocks. And there's a lindention here, and there's a cactus up there. So I'm going to take my camera, and I'm going to put it down here, and I'm going to frame it up with these rocks and take that picture. I'm using the Fuji X-T3 here. It's got this little articulating screen, which I really like, because now I don't have to lay down on the ground and stretch out. I can flip that screen up and see what I've got, frame up my shot, take it, and there we go. So I'm going to move around here. I've got some other angles where I can come down. I'm going to frame up with some cactus over here and see if I can't get a look that is interesting, a look that will compel people to want to look at this picture and let their eye linger on it for just a little bit of time. Here we are with our image opened up in Lightroom. I opted to go with the picture of the camera down low, shooting between two rocks. I think this has some nice composition, but we got a lot of issues here in the picture to deal with before we get in to do anything. First of all, we need to shoot in RAW. I know a lot of people like JPEG, and JPEGs are fine, especially when they're exposed fine, but you do have more control, you have more information in your file when you shoot RAW, and you can do more things with it. And you can do it less destructively than you can with a raw image. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to open up these shadows here. So we're going to grab the exposure. If we pull that up a little bit, we can see that we are opening up those shadows, but we're blowing out certain portions of the image here. So we're going to pull that back down, and we're going to go to our shadows, and we're going to pull our shadows to the right. And we can see those shadows opening up, and we're still maintaining detail in these highlights. We can even pull our highlights down a little bit, and we can see what that does to the top of that rock. So we're going to drop that just a little bit. We're going to open up our shadows, we're going to open up our whites a little bit, and pull our blacks down to create some contrast. Now, dealing with the contrast slider right here, when that pulls up, we tend to do some funky things. It gives us a color shift It crunches our blacks. It blows out our highlights. I like to take my contrast slider and pull it to the left. And we can see that opens up the shadows. It pulls those highlights down. Our color stays accurate. And we can create contrast by separating our white slider and our black slider. So I don't want a whole lot of contrast here. I want details in these shadows, and that's looking pretty good here. I want to pull that white slider down a bit, pull these shadows down just a bit, open up the blacks here, and this looks pretty nice. I've got great detail in the sky. I got good detail here in my shadows. My highlights aren't blown out, and everything looks crisp and sharp. So we're looking good here. We have a clarity slider here, and the clarity, you can go either way. Pull it to the right and you get a little bit of a more edgy look. Pull it down to the left and you get this dreamy soft look. We're going to stay close to the middle. I am going to open those up a little bit, but we don't want to do that too much. We start getting some artifacts in here that are a little bit funny. So we're just going to pull our clarity up just a little bit. Dehaze will just create more contrast or less contrast. I've used this on hazy days before and it just cuts right through the haze. So it's a nice tool, not really necessary today. Vibrance, we are going to crank our vibrance up because we want rich blue skies. We're going to target that blue, and that's how we're going to get that black sky. So we're going to bump vibrance up a little bit. Saturation, I don't like to mess with saturation much. If you pull that up, it just overblows colors. I like to get my colors popping by using the vibrance. It's just a little more natural. Let's examine this sharpening. Great tool, but a dangerous tool. We're going to zoom in on our image. And if we look here at our blue sky, we got a nice solid color. If I take that sharpening up, we can see that we start creating these little worms. You get this pattern, this irregular pattern in there. I'm going to pull the radius up, and then I'm going to pull my detail up, and we can really see this picture starting to fall apart. Look at the chromatic aberration on the edge of that rock. We can see it on the edge of the roof here, and just worms like crazy. This is overdone. So we're going to back off on our sharpening amount. We're going to pull our detail way down, and we're going to pull our radius down. And we're going to study this masking tool just a little bit. In fact, I'm going to double click all these and set them back to the default. And this is our default settings here for Lightroom. Now, if we take the masking up and we drag it up, and then we take our amount up, we can see that we've created this glassy type of look on our barn, but it hasn't affected our sky. We can see the fence back here. We can see this masking effect by holding down our Alt key, grabbing the masking tab, and pulling it up. Now, when we see this black and white, what this says to us is that we are going to sharpen everything that is white, and everything that is black we're going to leave alone. If I drag this masking key, if I drag this masking slider up while holding down that Alt key, we can see that we've got all this white area in here, and that is going to be sharpened. The black is not. So I'm going to pull this down. I don't want to sharpen any of the sky. I want to leave some of those areas alone that are flat and there's not a lot of detail in them. So I'm going to do that, let go of my key, and now I'm going to bring my sharpening up, but not too much. You see how we get that glassy look here? I'm going to back off on that. Our radius, it's another great tool, but it's got some dangers. You don't want to pull it up too high. So we're going to leave that radius down here at about 1.2. Detail, again, that is a dangerous tool. We don't want to damage our picture, so we're just going to pull this up a little bit. We're going to do some further sharpening once we get into Photoshop. But for right now, that looks about right. Okay, we're going to come back up here to the top, and we've got a treatment right here, color or black and white. We want to go black and white, so we're going to click on that. Now, that changes our picture to black and white. but the color information is still there. So if we go down to our black and white panel right here, and note it says black and white, if we come up here and click color, and we come down here and we're going to get HSL color, which this is hue, saturation, luminance. Right here, hue, saturation, luminance. But we're not going to play with those color tabs. We're going to go black and white, come down here, and this is the black and white tab. But our color information is still intact, which means I can grab the red channel, drag it down, drag it up, and as you can see, there's not much red in there. So we're going to leave that, maybe bump up that red channel just a bit. Orange, there's a lot more orange in there, so we can control our orange tones by dragging that slider. We're going to come up just slightly. Yellow, same thing. Look at the top of that rock. We're going to keep it to where it pops, but we don't want to blow anything out. Green, I doubt if there's much in there, and there isn't. We can pull this slider both to the extreme slides, plus and minus. Nothing's happening. We'll leave it in the middle. Aqua. This should be our sky, and it's a little bit of our sky, not very much. But we can get this down at the bottom here. You can see it starting to change the tones in there. So we're going to drag that down just a bit. Let's see what the blue slider does. If we pull it up, it blows out. If we pull it down, it goes black. Now, this is approaching the look that we want. But if we take this blue and crunch it all the way down, we tend to get artifacts in here. We get some banding. Even though this is a 16-bit image, we're still going to get some banding in here. So we don't want to go that extreme. We're going to pull it down to where it's just dark. We can see a little bit of the graduation here from the darker to the lighter. Purple and magenta generally are pretty neutral, so we're just going to leave those right there. And that's about what we want for our image. So we're going to take this and export this, and then we're going to open it up in Photoshop and go to the next stage. Alright, we've got our image opened up in Photoshop, and first thing I'm going to do is create a second layer. And we're going to isolate several of these objects and work on them individually. So we're going to be creating a composite here. What I want to do is I want to select the barn, I'm going to select these rocks, and then I'm going to select the foreground here. And we're going to create a separate sky that we can manipulate without the artifacts and the banding that we might get if we were to just work on this picture in one piece. So I'm going to start over here with my quick selection tool, and I'm just going to start selecting these rocks. I'm going to zoom in a little bit, come down, and grab these. So I'm going to go through this very meticulously, and we'll come back to this in just a second. Okay, so I've got my rocks selected here. I'm going to go to Select and Mask, and I'm going to choose on my view to go with my overlay. Lots of different options here. You've got marching ants. You can do an onion skin where it shows through. You can do a black or a white. I choose overlay just because I like the contrast between the red and my subject. On this image, it works well. Different images, you'll use different views. So let's go with that. We're going to pull our radius all the way down to 0. We can see that the radius starts giving you those edges. So we're going to pull that down to 0. I'm going to leave Smart Radius checked. I've also got Smooth, Feather, and Contrast all set down to 0. If I zoom in here, Command plus, I'm going to come in here and just look at our edge here. And it's not too bad. If I pull the radius up a tiny bit, it's just going to give us a little bit of a softer edge. It'll look a little bit more natural. The object of Photoshop is to make it look like your subject has not been photoshopped. And since this is going to paste directly on top of the rock that is already in the image, this is going to work fine. So we're going to come down here to our output. We're going to put New Layer with Layer Mask, and we're going to hit OK. Now that makes the layer beneath it invisible, so we can activate that, or we can turn off our bottom layer and we can see that we've just got our rock right here placed directly over. When I turn off our rock, nothing happens because it's directly over our other rock. So now we need to come back down to our background copy. Don't work on your mask layer, and we are going to select our second rock. So I'm back to the quick select tool. I like to start from the center, work toward the edges, and I'm just going to come down here and grab that. A little more contrast in this one, so it selects very easily. And that probably is going to work right there. Let's take that. We're going to go back up here, grab select and mask. We're still in our overlay, and we can look at our tones here and they look pretty good. And we're going to stay with new layer with layer mask, hit OK, and it creates a new layer. So by looking at those two layers here, we've got two separate rocks and a background that has the rest of our material. We're going to go in and select the barn. Once again, let's go down to our background copy. Let's grab our quick select. I'm going to zoom in on this pretty tight. Now, as I'm picking these pixels, the edges on some of these are a little bit soft. So I'm going to go to my polygonal lasso tool, hit my shift key, and I'm just going to draw some lines here. After I've got the bulk of the barn selected, I'm going to go back to my lasso tool, and I'm going to freehand, holding my shift so I get that little plus. See that little plus right there on my lasso? The shift means I am going to add to that selection. If I hold the Alt key down, I get a minus, and that allows me to subtract from my selection. So I'm going to come down here with the minus. I'm just going to grab this, and then I'm going to hold my shift, and I'm going to grab this foreground here. Come up, get the rest of that in there, and that's a pretty good selection here. So we're going to go to select and mask, zoom in on our selection here. You can see that with the radius down all the way, I'm going to pull that radius up just a little bit, enough to give us just a natural look. Everything else here looks pretty good. Once again, new layer with layer mask. I'm going to hit OK, and there is our third layer. Next, we want to select these posts, the cactus, this fence post over here, and this fence post here. Back to my background copy. I'm going to zoom in on these, and once again I'm going to use my polygonal lasso tool. So I'm going to come down and just follow these lines. And there's my selection on this particular portion of the post. I'm going to go into select and mask, pull my radius down just a bit, maybe up just a bit. See these little pixel-like looking features hanging over? Let's get rid of those. And we'll go with that right there. New layer with layer mask, hit OK, and there is our fence post. Make the background copy visible again. Choose it. And now I'm going to come down here with my quick select tool, keeping my brush relatively small. Grab some of these cactus areas and this little fence here. By holding down my Alt key, I'll deselect all this area in here with the sky. Deselect that. Okay, got our selection here. Back to our select and mask. And this time we're going to pull radius up a little bit. I want these edges a little bit more, a little softer than what we had on the structures. We'll go with that. And come to the other side. Select our post here. The Alt key deselects. So we'll go with that selection, select and mask. Once again, we should be set on everything. I'm going to pull my radius down even a little bit for these. And new layer with layer mask, hit OK. And there are all the layers that we should need to create this composite. I'm going to turn off my background copies, my background layer and my background copy here. And as we turn these layers off, we can see that we've just picked different elements. Since we've got all these elements broken up individually, we can manipulate each one as we please. So let's turn off these two background layers and let's go to our first rock right here. We're going to click on the layer, not on the mask. And we're going to create an adjustment layer right here. It's the circle, half white, half black. We're going to click that and we're going to go to levels. And we see our little histogram pop up here. We've got our highlights on the right, our midtones in the middle, and our blacks on the left. We really don't want to clip into these highlights or blacks. We're going to take our midtones and bring it up just a little bit. I'm going to pull those blacks back just a tad like that and just create a little bit of contrast in there. So you can see that what we've done is we've made some adjustments to the rock there, made it kick a little bit, but everything else was also affected by our adjustments in this adjustment layer. The way we fix that is we're going to click on this little clipping mask icon right here at the very end down in our taskbar. So we click that, and now this adjustment layer will only affect the layer immediately below it. So we're going to close that out and we're going to turn that back on and just see what we did. We kicked up a little bit of, made it a little brighter with that rock, but I don't like what it did with the shadow and I don't like what's going on over here. So I'm going to click on the mask, go to my brush, make sure that my color is black. This little arrow here switches us back and forth from white to black when in regards to a mask. So now we're going to take our opacity about 45%, about half, and we're going to put our brush on a soft brush and we're going to paint out, bring that shadow back to a higher contrast. And that looks better. We're also going to just hit up in there and bring those high tones down. And that's not looking too bad. We can see how we painted the mask in right here, and that just gives us a little bit more brightness on that rock. So that one looks fine. Let's go to our next rock right here, and we'll turn that background off again. And so we've got this layer right here, that rock on the right. And once again, we're going to click on the layer, not the mask. We're going to create an adjustment layer. We're going to go to levels. We're going to bring up our whites right here. We're going to bring up our midtones. And we're going to bring our blacks down a little bit. And we're going to hit our clipping mask right there. and that gives us a brighter rock. Much more detail in here. We're going to close this out, and now we're going to click on our mask. We're still on 45%. We know we have a soft brush. We're on black, and we're just going to paint out the top of that rock. One swipe, click again, two swipes, keep clicking and swiping, and that looks all right. Bring some of that shadow back, and now we've got that rock looking pretty good. I'm going to close out that shadow just a little bit here. Make sure that doesn't look separate, and that blends together nicely. Now we've got the barn. There's the barn right there. So let's click on that layer, make an adjustment layer here, go to levels, hit our clipping mask, and now we're going to bring up our midtones, bring up our whites, bring our blacks down just a bit, and I'm going to close that out, give us a background, and we can see what we've done. Front of the barn looks good. This is too bright, and so is that. So we're going to go to our mask, take off this area in the front here and on the cactus. We're going to close that back down, and also the top, and we've got the front of the barn like that. If that is too bright for us, we do have opacity right here ranging from 100% to 0, and we can just dial in what we want. I'm going to pull that down just a bit, right about there, and that's pretty nice. That opens that up just a little bit. So there are adjustments on our individual layers here that we separated earlier in this project. We're going to click on background copy, and now we're going to create an empty layer. We're going to create an empty layer right above this background copy by just clicking on the new layer icon in our layers palette. So there's an empty icon which has no information in it. We're going to fill that with black. So over here we've got our black color picker here, and we're just going to do the keyboard shortcut, which is Alt Delete, and that fills our layer with black. Obviously we don't want this covering up what's down here, so we're going to do a Command T for transform and grab this middle handle and pull that up. And as we look at this, we can see that we've shortened our black. We've now got black sky. We're going to hit enter and apply those changes. So there's our black sky, and everything stands out real nice against it. The problem is that we've lost all of our foliage. We've lost all this fence material back here. We've lost a lot of details that really give this photo authenticity. So what we're going to do is create a mask right here on this now half-filled layer. We're going to click on the mask icon, the square with a hole in it, and we're going to make sure that we're black and white right here. We're going to click our gradient tool, and our gradient reveals our gradient tools up here on top when we click on that, and we can see that we're black to white, and we're on a linear gradient. We have several options here. Our first one is linear, and we're going to go with that. The black to white, we know what that does to our mask, so if we click up here and pull this down, the black, which is on the bottom half of the mask, is actually revealing what's underneath. So we get this nice smooth gradation, and we've now revealed our fence lines and all of our foliage that's underneath there. And over here, our cactus, we've just got really nice lines going on here. This gradient tool, you can do it as many times as you want. I can click it right here and just drag a short gradient. I could grab it at an angle. I could come all the way down to the bottom, which would be almost the same as solid black. But I'm going to come down to about here and let some of that come through. And that looks pretty good right there. We've got good rich blacks. We got a nice gradiated tone down here. And that looks just like what we want. We've manipulated each one of our layers here and brought up the brightness and the contrast. So now what we want to do is just finish this off. We're going to click on that top layer, and then we're going to hit Shift, Control, Alt, and E all at the same time. Shift, Control, Alt, E. And that gives us a layer that is a composite of everything down here. So that is now one layer that is our image. If I was to use our levels on that, we can see that we just affect that whole layer. We're going to create a copy of that, and we're going to add a filter to this. So we're going to go up to the top, Filter, Other, and we're going to create a high pass filter. The high pass filter reveals specific portions of the image, and we can control this, and we don't want to see much of it. Only bring this down to about maybe 3.4, and we can see the outline of the barn and the rocks in here. We're going to hit OK on that, and then we're going to change our blending modes right here in the layers palette where that says normal. We've got all these blending modes. We're going to go down to overlay, click on that, and that is going to add sharpening. So as we zoom in here and look at this, we can turn that off and on, and you can see the sharpening is pretty substantial. And as long as we don't get carried away with it, there's no artifacts, there's no banding, our black remains very solid, but it just adds a little kick to that. Now, I want to flatten those two layers. So by holding my Shift key, I can select both, and then I'm going to do Control E, and that flattens both layers. But it leaves everything else intact. We want to keep all our other layers down here. And we're going to create one more layer here, and we're going to add some curves. We're going to create an adjustment layer right here, and we're going to go Curves. And our histogram is right here in front of us. We're going to pull our highlights up just a little bit and our blacks down just a tad, just to create a little bit more contrast, a little bit more kick. We can turn that off and on, and that just gives us a little bit more brightness, a little bit more contrast. If we want to back off on it and a little bit more contrast, and that's it, our final image, using composite layers and a gradient to create a black sky that still has transparency to really let the foreground material show through.